Dr. Nasr, what do you think the Arab world wants?
First of all, whatever I say really pertains to the whole of the Islamic world, but we're concentrating on the Arab world. Let me start by saying that...
Are they synonymous, do you think?
No, they're not synonymous.
But
There
parallel
are many,
goals,
many
parallel
common
goals.
elements.
Good.
There is such a thing as the Islamic world, as there's such a thing as the Western world. The relation between Poland and the United States is not the same as Burma and the United States. Obviously, there's some relationship, although Poland is very different from the United States. There are differences, but there is such a thing as the Islamic world. But let me concentrate on the Arab world, and what I say pertains really to elsewhere. All of these discussions, the nice discussions we're having, are based on the idea there's some kind of a parity. This side does that, the other side does the equal thing. I wish this were the case. We have to do everything in light of the fact that there is no parity. The situation of the Islamic world, the Arab world, is very much like that of South America. Argentina cannot have interests in Texas, but the United States can have interests in Argentina. And therefore, it makes the whole giving and taking different, although they're Christians, they're Westerners, speaking Indo-European languages, Spanish or Portuguese. Now, in the Arab world, there's a great deal of feeling that, of course, there's no respect because there is no parity, there is no discourse, they're not dealing as equals. That's why people like myself believe that at the heart of this possibility of mutual understanding is the understanding between the religions. Because, first of all, the religions have created both of these civilizations. No matter how many people become atheists in the West, the foundation of Western civilization has to do with Christianity, obviously. And the same with, of course, with the Arabs and Islam. In religion, it's easier to come to an accord of mutual respect because religious people are supposed to be people of God. Not that everybody does it. I didn't say that. I didn't say Pat Robertson or his equal in Pakistan have done that. But it's much easier than if you say, I have 2,000 nuclear bombs, you don't even have one, you have no right to have one, let's now sit down together and we'll talk together as equal. This is not going to happen.
Question. If a government is an Islamic government, and if a movement claims to be an Islamic movement, because religion is in the mix, and God is in the mix, does that suggest a kind of a superiority, a divine ordination that this government, this movement is right?
Throughout history, this has oftentimes been the case, but when there's been no religion, some other ideology takes its place. People have died for the sake of Nazism, for communism, for liberalism, as well as for Christianity and Islam and everything else. There's no doubt about that.
But does it get in the way? Because here in America, we have lots of religions, lots of people. Religion is not at the heart. As a matter of fact, we try to keep it separate.
But, but religion has been invoked by American presidents to justify
it has, and Dennis,
their absolutist right to dictate policies.
But the absolute authority in this country is the Constitution of the United States.
Absolutely
no,
right.
Constitution, nothing to do with this.
No.
One at a time. Just one, because the cameras want to pick you up.
Dennis, if you look at Europe, for example, and count the number of Christian democratic parties, you have, and we have to be very careful too when we talk about, you said Islamic parties. There's a very big distinction between Islamist parties and Islamic.
Bravo.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Islamic is really a very religious term. Islamist is a political term. And Islamist.
Say that again, please.
Islamist ends with ST.
Yeah.
Invokes some of the political movements that you see now in current events. Islamic, IC, ending in IC, is really very much a religious term.
Laila, jump in.
You know, as we were talking about how the Arab world views the United States, I think that what the Queen had said and what Dr. Anthony had said, is very true. They have a lot of Arabs have a natural affinity for the United States. They've been educated, they've watched Hollywood movies, they eat the fast food, whatever. They have an affinity for the U.S., but they have a definite dislike for a lot of U.S. policies. And I think that, generally Americans can't see the difference there. They seem to think, particularly in this last, in the last administration, they tried to link those together. Oh, well, they don't like us, why do they hate us? But that's not necessarily the case. It wasn't the case. So many Arabs have been educated here in the United States. I'm a product of what Queen Noor was talking about. My father came to the United States, was educated here, he married an American woman. So I'm a product of one of those exchanges. Those are very important. We need to get back to those so that Americans can look at Arabs much differently than they already are looking at Arabs. And to just, bridge some of the things that have happened in these last 10, 8 years now. And I think that one of the ways that we can continue to do these are these programs that the Queen was talking about. I think that they're essential for getting Americans to understand more about the Arab world. Your last program talked about the Arab Festival. Americans don't generally think of Arabs as having a culture of arts and, singing and plays.
Boy, how deep it is, huh?
And we need to see more of that. Yeah. I think it's essential that, we engage in those types of cross-cultural exchange programs.
And another I'm sorry. Go ahead. Just to add to that, another point that I think is extremely important is the point you made about policy, and Americans not understanding the impact of policy on perceptions and realities
and
in,
how people
in the
are
Middle
received.
East.
Yeah.
And the fact that in the Arab world, they're not really aware, I don't think, of how difficult it is to have an objective conversation in this country about Middle East policy. And I don't think Americans are aware generally of how difficult it is in this country for academics or politicians in the Congress, you name it, anywhere, for people to have an objective public discussion about American Middle East policy.
What would you like to, when you say objective, what's getting in the way here?
It's very simple. Every conversation about the Middle East is highly politicized, and there is enormous pressure. And it might be better to hear it hear you describe it with your long experience rather than one of us describe it. But there are interest groups and lobby groups in this country that wield an enormously disproportionate influence over American policy. This is opening up now a discussion that is really the big, what do they call it? Not the big
800-pound gorilla?
The gorilla. The 100-pound gorilla.
Yeah.
But it can't be ignored, I think, when you're talking about the region.
That's why we're here. Dr. Anthony?
Yes. We have a big problem here. It's massive, it's long-standing, it's pervasive, problematic in the extreme, and that is the imbalance between Americans' understanding of the Arab world and Arabs' understanding of the United States. Hisham and Laila have made reference to it. American University of Beirut, American University in Cairo. There isn't anything remotely like that here in the United States. Saudi Arabia alone has more than 200,000 American university graduates. In Saudi Arabia's cabinet since 1975, there have been more American-trained PhDs than any kind of PhDs in the U.S. Cabinet, Supreme Court, Senate, and House of Representatives combined. That's just one country. So around 400,000 Arabs have gotten their undergraduate degrees from the United States. We're at 305, 310 million now. I don't know of a single American who got her or his undergraduate degree from any of the 22 Arab countries' universities. This gross imbalance there is profound, and it's part of the seed of our ignorance. Won't always be that. Many Americans fault the Arab countries for not having centers for American studies. Well, here in the United States, we have only one center for Arab studies. Out of about 3,800 universities, we have one.
Hold on that note. If you're just joining us, This is America Visits the Arab World. Sit tight, back on the other side to continue our conversation.
This is America is brought to you by Hyundai Motor America, maker of the 2009 Sonata. The National Education Association, the nation's largest advocate for children and public education. The Rotendaro Family Trust, the CTC Foundation, and the American Life TV network.
All that was discussed about policy that Her Majesty and others spoke about is absolutely correct, but this is only half the story. We always say Muslims love America except for its bad policy. There's another element that all over the world people...
And is that bad policy occupation, war?
First of all, having only the interests of Israel in mind and not the Palestinians. Since I'm not in an official position, I can't speak openly. That's why they say there's no justice involved in this matter.
So when the Secretary of the League of Arab States says to me in an interview we did for the Arabesque program that what the Arab world would like is an honest broker.
Of course,
that phrase,
absolutely.
That phrase.
But there's a second part to this which is just as important. American pop culture is a threat to the existence of all other non-Western cultures. Every Arab father is worried that his daughter wants to show her belly button because she saw it in a film. Don't think this is a small matter.
No.
A lot of the
Every American mother is too.
Yeah, but all of these transformations in America have come from within American society.
But I want you to continue on that thread. We did a program couple of years, 2-3 years ago, with 8 foreign journalists. And I asked them, in your own country, what were your concerns about America? And they said 2 things. We don't like America coming in and telling us what to do. And we are so afraid that our culture is going to get swallowed up by the American culture. And we find the American culture repulsive.
Unfortunately, that's the case, because the part of American culture, I would just say jokingly, no young Arab is interested in listening to Howard Hanson's Second Symphony. If you had a voice, I would turn it off immediately.
And they like our music.
It's the pop music,
fashion.
It's the rap music, it's words of violence, it's words that incite sexual passions. It's things like that they like, not the classical American culture or reading T.S. Eliot.
But how do you get the narrative to say that these are some people who, as Ambassador said right at the beginning of the program, and Laila underscored, they're interested in values, religion, family, they're warm, they're gracious, and they see this, there are a lot, you laugh about, this is, American parents don't want their kids to have it, but what do you do when the genie's out of the bottle?
Can I defend American popular culture?
I hope you will.
I grew up in Beirut, listening to rock and roll and blues.
Yes.
I worship American blues.
I know that.
I think Chicago blues is the best blues and music in the world.
Well, you get some
I think the
argument,
Americans in the 19th and the 20th century created the best music in the world, from jazz to country to blues to rock and roll, and you name it. And I love it, and it's a great thing. A professor is talking about rap. I watched
talking about
rap music.
Rap.
I personally don't like rap music. It doesn't hit me the way blues hits me, or soul or whatever. But I was watching a program about Palestinian youth using rap Arabic music. They were completely influenced by the American popular culture, and they were using it as a form of resistance against Israeli occupation. It was brilliant. It was
exactly what happened during the colonial period, when Arabs and non-Arabs were totally westernized, took the lead to make themselves independent of the West. Habib Bourguiba what was the Arab about Habib Bourguiba himself, his name, and Sukarno in Indonesia and all the lands in between. That's what has landed us here. That is, it is not enough to use this for resistance against the Israelis. Why is it that American youth do not listen to Palestinian music in the same way? There's no parity. It's a flood from one side.
Professor, the world, if you remember the first paragraph in George Orwell's Animal Farm, all animals were created equal, but some animals are more equal than others. You can paraphrase it and say, all states were created equal, but some states are more equal than others. It's a fact of life. This is a world, you are a man of religion. I'm not. This world is not governed by religions today. This world is based on state interests. We are dealing with state interests. Our problem with U.S. foreign policy has nothing to do with theology, although Arabs and Westerners sometimes use religion to justify political ends. The problem is, we're talking about Palestine, we're talking about land, we're talking about patrimony, we're talking about human rights.
The conflict, theology, there would be no Israel. What are you talking about?
Yes, but it was a political project that used theology to justify political ends.
So
Herzl was like Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Muhammad Ali Jinnah, and the ambassador knows more about him than anybody else here. Muhammad Ali Jinnah was a European gentleman who used to enjoy his bourbon. and never cared about mosques. And he established an Islamic state. Mr. Herzl was a Zionist who was a secularist, never seen probably a synagogue. And then this was a political project. We are talking about politics, not religion, and that's why I have a problem when people introduce religion to politics, whether they are Westerners, Christians. No, but we have to be critical and analytical about that. We're not fighting the Israelis over theological disputes. We are engaging in the fight with the Israelis over land and territory and human rights and political rights.
Is it as simple as two groups of people want the same piece of land?
Absolutely, that's part of it, sure.
Her Majesty.
I think it's a larger issue than that, and it encompasses international law. It encompasses a whole range of conventions and international. I don't want to get into the political side, but I think it's more complex than that. I want to talk about pop culture, if I might, just shift the subject. Because you're pointing at an opportunity that we have as well, which we have not fully explored and developed, which is Arabesque was a wonderful example of an exchange of culture that absolutely mesmerized American audiences who saw it, because, as Laila said, they haven't seen that face of the that very multifaceted face of the Arab world. And yet that is a one-off or relatively limited range of impact that Arabesque will have. We have to penetrate pop culture with messages, just as was done in the 1960s. The Arab and the Muslim world, we have the resources to do more than just put out media satellite stations that reach ourselves, and or something like Al Jazeera International, which is an excellent English language international satellite program. But we also have to reach into other areas of pop culture with the reality, real images of our culture and societies. I thought I would just mention one thing that's just symbolic, which is we're talking about the Arab and Muslim resistance to the globalizing impact of American culture, and you were talking about sort of the overexposed American women, for example. On the other hand, in Europe and in the United States and elsewhere, the veil, the hijab, has become a symbol of something threatening, frightening, demeaning, and the two extremes, where the veil is forced on a woman, or she is forced to retreat, or where women are pressured to overexpose themselves in order to create value for themselves. Both extremes really aren't healthy at all. There is nothing to be fearful about a Muslim woman choosing to cover her hair, as Christian and Jewish women did through the ages, as Muslim women have done through the ages, as a personal choice to be taken at face value, or literally for her own personal value, and not as a sexual object, for example. That is a valid choice, I think.
I have to take it. And if it's a choice, if it's a choice,
if it is a
how about if it's mandated?
For the most part, it is a choice.
There's a lot of social pressure.
And that
There's a lot of social
goes back
pressure.
to what Hisham was talking about.
I have to take care of this one piece of business, because we're trying to bring people together. The Cultural Tourism DC group has a big international showcase coming up April 30th through May 9th. Part of that is an open house at many of the embassies on May 2nd. You can tour the embassies, and on May 9th, a children's festival at Meridian House, where they want to bring everybody together. And all you have to do is go to the web, www.passportdc.org, and they will give you all the information. We send Senator Mitchell abroad at President Obama's direction. And he walks in, and he's across the table from Netanyahu. Two worlds collide right there, huh?
George Mitchell comes to this challenge, and I'll defer to you, having been through the Northern Ireland peace process. So it is not like a meeting of two people on the same level. One man has seen it all. He has seen all the extremes and understood how important it is to bring all the parties to the table if you're going to achieve a solution. You cannot marginalize those you don't like for whatever reason it might be. And so he has been there, seen that, and now
he's also constrained. But the Ireland one is important to him. He had to negotiate with 5 different sets of people for his mediation role. And in the last few days before the accord, a poll was taken in Ireland as to whether there would be a peaceful accord, and the overwhelming majority said no. So the aspect of his dogged determinism, he was indefatigable, bore fruit there. He's also fond of pointing out the South African example. He uses both of them to say only when political groups drop their use of violence or portrayal of violence or espousal of violence can there be a breakthrough. Those are 2 aberrations. Those are 2 extreme exceptions in terms of how peace has been achieved.
Do you think that there's some credibility, like we've had around the North Korean problem, to have like a 6-party talks around peace?
We've already had them. We have a quartet, so to speak, that's spoken.
But a little different than the 6-party talks.
Yes, well, this one needs a symphony.
But you don't think a mistake has been made in isolating out groups like Hamas and others?
I do believe it's a mistake.
The Northern Ireland example perhaps is a bit of a template, not an exact one, but for what has been missing and what needs to be reassessed in terms of Middle East peacemaking.
He's open on this, and we've spoken on this about being inclusive versus being exclusive there. In the case of Vietnam, neither the Viet Cong or the North Vietnamese ever recognized the right of the South Vietnamese government to exist, but it didn't stop us negotiating in Paris for months. Had we stood on that particular issue or principle, we'd still be there. Likewise, for 13 other countries that divested themselves of colonial territories in the last century, if we stood on that particular principle, there'd be 130 fewer members of the United Nations today.
Let me ask Dr. Nasr as we finish up here. What do you see the Arab world's responsibility to lend support to brokering peace between Israel and Palestine?
They bear immense responsibility, but they don't have the power. That's is a question of power. They bear tremendous responsibility. They need to, first of all, of course, strengthen what the West calls moderate forces, but on the condition that there is not a strong response from the other side. You cannot respond to killing by sitting down and smiling unless you happen to be Mahatma Gandhi. Usually people react with violence to violence. And the Islamic world has no power either over Israel or over the United States, which is a friend of Israel. Therefore, it has to look within its own borders. And they have the responsibility of trying to look, I think, first of all, at the long run, the long term. Try to do everything possible to create a kind of Palestinian peace movement, I think, that would do wonders. And it's very interesting.
In the Arab world?
In Palestine itself, with the help of other Arabs. And not to make deals behind the scene against each other, as has been happening during the last few years. Nobody talks about it very much. But it's interesting that every single Palestinian leader who has tried to come forward as a kind of Gandhian pacifist has been eliminated. Not by Palestinians, but by Israel.
There is an Arab peace initiative. There is an Arab peace initiative accepted officially by all Arab states, especially the Israelis. Go back to 67 borders, recognize the Palestinian state, and we will all recognize you and normalize relations with you.
Has put today, it's a 23-state solution. Not a 2-state solution, but it offers peace with 22 Arab states and Israel. Right. Can I add one comment? Because you didn't have a chance to go there fully. One thing that I don't think is understood, and that is a basis for common ground that we haven't talked about here, is the fact that Jerusalem, for example, as my husband always hoped and prayed, would once again become a city of peace where throughout history, or not always throughout history, but at times in history, Jews, Muslims, and Christians have lived in harmony together. Jews, Christians, and Muslims recognizing there so clearly, because they were living so closely in harmony together, the shared roots of the 3 faiths. That Islam, in fact, is a faith that recognizes the prophets back to Adam. And it builds, it is a faith that recognizes all the prophets of Judaism, Christianity, and the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, the last prophet of the Abrahamic faiths. But common values, common teachings, common figures that we revere from Jesus all the way back to Adam. These are the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and our faith, our Holy Quran. That is not understood by people in the United States, by the vast majority of people. They do not even understand something that fundamental to our lives, to our faiths, and to our opportunities to find common ground.
We're all people of the book.
And we are people of the book.
Out of time. I thank you all for a wonderful conversation. Educational, I hope. Thank you all for participating and sharing your thoughts and your passion. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For online video of all This Is America programs, visit our website, thisisamerica.net. This Is America is brought to you by Hyundai Motor America, maker of the 2009 Sonata. The National Education Association, the nation's largest advocate for children and public education. The Rotendaro Family Trust, the CTC Foundation, and the American Life TV Network.